Hello, everyone. Today's insider is Rabbi Marc Schneier. He's a special advisor to the King of Bahrain and has been meeting with royals, emirs, and political leaders in the Gulf for over a decade now. Rabbi, thanks so much for being with us. You're probably one of the only people that wasn't surprised to hear about Israel and the UAE.
I've been in the Gulf region, the Arabian Gulf region, for 12 years now. I entered that region under the patronage of the late King of Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah. I had a twofold mission. One was to advance my work in building Muslim-Jewish relations, but I also wanted to begin cultivating Gulf-Israel relations. And it's been an amazing, amazing journey. Michal, this is just the first benchmark. There's no question that the UAE and Israel normalizing ties will have a ripple effect throughout the region. So it's a wonderful beginning, but it's a beginning, and we should be very excited about this beginning, but there's a lot more good news to come.
Who should we expect next?
I believe two things. I will predict that by the end of 2020, one or two more Gulf states will normalize ties with Israel. And if I was a betting man, I predict the first will be the Kingdom of Bahrain. There is no Arab Gulf leader more deserving of this recognition than His Majesty King Hamad, the King of Bahrain. Since I first met with him in the palace in Manama in 2011, he has always shared and expressed to me his genuine desire to establish relations with Israel. It was the King of Bahrain who, from 2013 to 2015, he led the GCC in legislating Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. After Trump announced the moving of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it was the King of Bahrain who then sent an interfaith delegation from Bahrain as a demonstration of solidarity. I might remind all our viewers that it did take the Israelites 40 years to get to the promised land. I believe the promised land of Gulf-Israel relations, it's not a 40-year journey, it's not a 30-year journey, it could be a 1 or 2 year journey. But the exciting news that with the UAE, Israel normalization of ties, this is a landmark along the journey with many, many more exciting landmarks and benchmarks to come.
What kind of responses are you hearing from interfaith communities and leaders?
Quite a few of them thought I was always barking up the wrong tree. There goes Marc Schneier again with his Pollyannish predictions and objectives and work. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge the preeminent and prominent role that the interfaith channel played in bringing this peace accord to reality. And when I first entered the Gulf 12 years ago, Michal, I would always hear comments, Rabbi, we have nothing against Jews, all right? It's Israelis and Zionists, that's the problem. And for 12 years, I and a few others, we hammered away at Gulf leaders, at Muslim faith leaders, that for the Jewish people, the state of Israel, it's not a political issue. It's an issue of religion. Israel has been at the very core of Judaism for 3,500 years. And you're asking me to bifurcate, to break out Israel from Judaism would be like my asking a Muslim faith leader to break out halal and Sharia from Islam. And since there has been a growing commitment in the Gulf, whether it's the Emirates with their year of tolerance, whether it's the late King of Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah, launching his great interfaith center in Vienna that's now moving to Geneva, whether it's the King of Bahrain, where Bahrain doesn't need to declare a year of tolerance. They've had years of tolerance for over 200 years now. The fact that the president of the Jewish community, the head of the Hindu community, of the Catholic community, they all sit in the higher council of the Bahraini parliament. So you have that interreligious commitment. The fact that in Qatar you have the Doha Interfaith Center, where I sit on the board as I do in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia. So you had this tremendous commitment to reach out, Islam to begin reaching out to the West, to engage in dialogue. And I would say time and time again, if you want to have an authentic dialogue between Islam and Judaism, between Muslims and Jews, you must recognize that the state of Israel, it's not a political issue. It's not some 70-year political reality for the Jewish people. It's at the very core of our religion. And thank God today, I rarely, if ever, hear comments, rabbis, we're not, again, nothing against Jews, but we need to delineate when it comes to Israelis and Zionists. I no longer hear those comments. And I believe that being able to build that foundation in such a deeply rooted religious society where the imams and the sheikhs and the Muslim faith leaders play such a preeminent and dominant role was a very, very significant and key component to the success of this momentous, historic, celebratory event of the normalization of ties between Israel and the Emirates.
There's a small Jewish community in the Emirates. What can you tell me about them?
Well, already they have 2 synagogues. Already they have 2 rabbis. That's usually the sign of any authentic community. God forbid there should only be 1 synagogue and 1 rabbi. And now Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the crown prince, has announced he's building a synagogue in Abu Dhabi as part of his tri-state chapel known as the Abrahamic House. It's a growing Jewish community. It's a flourishing Jewish community. If you've ever been to Dubai, it's a very, very privileged, and same for Abu Dhabi. It's a very privileged, it's a very luxurious place to be. I could see multitudes of tourists, whether they come from American, Jewish tourists or Israeli tourists flocking to the Gulf. Once they flock to the Gulf, that will trigger even greater growth in Jewish life. So in terms of the future of the Jewish community of the Emirates, this is a win-win for everyone.
You mentioned you feel more comfortable walking around with the kippah in the Emirates than certain countries in Europe. Explain.
Well, yeah. My comment was more about walking around the kippah in Bahrain than in Berlin. I think it's a testament to our 2 faith communities, Judaism and Islam. There are no 2 other faith communities, Michal, that have more in common than Islam and Judaism, Muslims and Jews. When we pray, our synagogues are oriented toward Jerusalem. When Muslims pray, they're oriented towards Mecca. We have dietary laws. We have kashrut. They have halal. They pray 5 times a day. We pray 3 times a day. They have imams. We have rabbis. Their Sabbath is on Friday. Ours is on Sunday. And there's no and most importantly, we're family. We are the children of Abraham. What's the name of this historic peace treaty? It's the Abrahamic Accords. And I wrote the book, The Sons of Abraham. My book that I co-authored with Imam Shamsi Ali, as the chief imam in New York. That's the definitive text in Muslim-Jewish relations. And the book focuses on the issues that unite and divide Muslims and Jews. But one thing is clear, that not only are we family. I remember the king of Bahrain once saying to me, Rabbi, remember that Muslims and Jews, we're family. It doesn't mean we haven't had some family disagreements, but we're still family. And not only do we share a common faith, but we share a common fate. And it is our single destiny as Muslims and Jews that must strengthen our bonds of concern, compassion, and caring for each other.
Rabbi, thanks so much for weighing in today. Always a pleasure.